On our honeymoon, my husband handed me a train ticket, sneer, only 2 tickets, you go by train, I'm flying with Mom. The words hit me like a slap across the face. We were supposed to be starting our life together, embarking on an adventure filled with love and shared dreams. Instead, I stood there in the bustling railway station, clutching that flimsy piece of paper as if it were a lifeline while he walked away toward the departure gates for his flight. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was meant to be our time, a sacred chapter where we left behind everything familiar and forged something new between us. But from the moment we said "I do," cracks had begun to form beneath the surface of what I thought was solid ground. It started small, little comments about how much closer he felt to his mother than anyone else, casual remarks about how she always knew best. At first, I dismissed them as harmless quirks, remnants of a deep bond shaped over decades. Who could blame him? She raised him alone after all, pouring every ounce of herself into making sure her son turned out well. And yet, now here I was, standing at the edge of this chasm that seemed insurmountable. As the train rumbled forward, carrying me farther away from him and closer to some destination neither of us cared about anymore, I couldn't help but replay those final moments before he turned his back. His expression hadn't been one of regret or guilt, it was almost triumphant, as though choosing his mother over me somehow validated his loyalty. My heart clenched painfully in my chest. How had it come to this? Wasn't marriage supposed to mean partnership, unity? Weren't vows meant to signify something permanent? The scenery blurred past the window, fields stretching endlessly under gray skies. I tried to focus on the rhythm of the wheels against the tracks, anything to drown out the cacophony inside my head. Yet no matter how hard I concentrated, memories kept flooding back, moments when things began shifting imperceptibly until they reached this breaking point. It happened gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. There was the dinner party where he introduced me not just as his fiancée but also added offhandedly, and of course you know Ma will always have my back. Or the weekend getaway cancelled because Mom needs me right now. Each incident on its own felt insignificant, easily brushed aside with rationalizations. He's close to her, families are complicated. But cumulatively, they built walls around him that I couldn't penetrate. No matter how many times I tried to bridge the gap, it felt like I was shouting into a void. By the time we exchanged rings, I convinced myself it would change. Marriage would bring clarity, wouldn't it? Surely, the act of committing to each other would shift priorities, realign loyalties. But instead, the dynamic only grew more pronounced. Every decision became a tug-of-war between me and his mother, though she never directly confronted me. Her presence loomed large nonetheless, a phantom limb influencing every move he made. Even during our wedding planning, her opinions carried weight far beyond mine. The flowers, the venue, even the guest list, all bore her subtle imprint. By the end of it, I wondered whose day it truly was. Now, sitting alone on this train, I realized how naive I'd been. Love isn't enough when competing forces pull someone in opposite directions. Loyalty isn't blind devotion if it comes at the expense of another person's happiness. And trust is fragile. Once shattered, it leaves behind shards that cut deeper than any betrayal ever could. Hours passed unmarked, the monotony of the journey offering little distraction from my spiraling thoughts. Occasionally, snippets of conversation from fellow passengers drifted through the compartment, laughter shared between friends, whispered reassurances between lovers, but none of it reached me. I remained cocooned in my own world, grappling with emotions too tangled to unravel. When hunger gnawed insistently at my stomach, I rummaged through my bag for the sandwich I'd hastily packed earlier. As I unwrapped it, I caught sight of the note tucked inside the plastic wrap. In neat handwriting, he'd scrawled, "Enjoy the ride. You'll understand someday." My fingers trembled as I stared at the words, anger bubbling up alongside confusion. Understand what? That his loyalty to his mother outweighed any promise he made to me? That convenience trumped commitment? Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. If I allowed myself to cry, I feared I might never stop. So I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing down bite after tasteless bite of bread and cheese. Around me, life continued unabated, the rhythmic clatter of the train, the occasional whistle piercing the air, the soft murmur of voices blending into white noise. None of it mattered. Nothing could touch the storm raging within me. At some point, exhaustion took hold, dragging me into a restless sleep. Dreams fragmented and disjointed played out behind closed eyelids, Images of arguments long past, fleeting moments of tenderness overshadowed by resentment, shadows of promises broken before they'd fully formed. When I woke abruptly, disoriented, the sun was setting outside the window, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink. For a brief second, the beauty of it stole my breath, pulling me momentarily out of my despair. Then reality crashed back in, heavier than before. I glanced at the empty seat beside me, imagining him sitting there instead of miles above me in a plane bound for who knows where. Would things have been different if I'd fought harder earlier? If I'd set boundaries sooner, demanded space for us to grow without interference? Or was this inevitable, written in invisible ink from the start? These questions haunted me, circling endlessly without resolution. Night fell eventually, cloaking the landscape in darkness. Passengers settled into their seats, some nodding off, others gazing blankly out the windows. I remained awake, staring at nothing in particular, replaying the events of the day over and over again in my mind. A part of me hoped he'd realize his mistake, turn around mid-flight, and meet me wherever this train was headed. Another part knew better, that hope was futile, rooted in wishful thinking rather than logic. Yet despite everything, a stubborn thread of defiance flickered within me. Maybe this wasn't the honeymoon I envisioned, but perhaps it didn't need to define the rest of my life either. Perhaps, somewhere along this lonely journey, I'd find fragments of myself I'd forgotten existed. Fragments strong enough to rebuild what had crumbled. With that thought lingering uncertainly in my mind, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, letting the steady hum of the train lull me once more. Ahead lay uncertainty, pain, and unanswered questions, but also possibility. And though the path ahead felt daunting, I resolved silently to face whatever came next, not for him, not for his mother, but for myself. The train screeched to a halt at a small station sometime after midnight. The platform was nearly deserted, save for a few shadowy figures pacing restlessly under dim flickering lights. I didn't know where we were, some forgotten town whose name blurred past on the signboard before I could read it, but the sudden stillness jarred me awake. For a moment, I considered stepping off, walking away into the unknown darkness and leaving everything behind. What would stop me? No one knew where I was, no one seemed to care. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was fear of what lay beyond that empty platform. Instead, I stayed seated, gripping the edge of my seat as if anchoring myself against some invisible tide threatening to pull me under. The conductor announced our next stop in a voice so monotone it might as well have been part of the train's machinery. Somewhere far away, I thought bitterly. Somewhere meaningless. As the train lurched forward again, I realized how quiet it had become inside the cabin. Most passengers had drifted off to sleep, their rhythmic breathing filling the silence like soft waves lapping at the shore. But even amidst this calm, my mind refused to settle. Every creak of the wheels, every distant whistle, felt magnified, echoing through the hollow spaces within me. And then, unexpectedly, the woman across from me stirred. She'd been silent throughout the journey, her face obscured by the brim of an oversized hat and the folds of a thick scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Now she lifted her head slowly, revealing sharp cheekbones softened slightly by age and eyes that glimmered with a wisdom born of years lived fully, and perhaps painfully. "You look like you're carrying a storm," she said softly, her voice cutting through the stillness like a knife slicing silk. Her words startled me, not because they were intrusive, but because they rang so true. Before I could respond, she continued, "Sometimes storms are necessary. They clear out what doesn't belong." I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Was she speaking metaphorically, or did she somehow see straight through me? "What makes you say that?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged lightly, adjusting the scarf around her shoulders. "You wear your pain like armor," she replied simply. "It's heavy, isn't it?" Her observation struck a chord deep within me. Pain was heavy, it weighed down every step, clouded every decision, colored every memory. Yet letting go felt impossible, like shedding skin too raw to expose. "I don't know what else to do," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. This stranger, with her piercing gaze and measured words, made confession feel safe in a way nothing else had lately. She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. "Do you want my advice?" she asked, tilting her head just enough to catch the faint light streaming in from outside. There was no judgment in her tone, only curiosity tinged with kindness. "Yes," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe desperation drove me to seek guidance from anyone willing to offer it. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted permission to believe there was another way forward. Then listen carefully, she said, her voice steady and deliberate. People will disappoint you. That's not news, it's human nature. But clinging to disappointment is a choice. You can let it shape you, define you, consume you, or you can decide it doesn't get the final say. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't understand the depth of what I was dealing with, but the truth was, she understood more than most ever would. Disappointment wasn't new to me. It had seeped into every corner of my relationship long before today, festering quietly until it erupted in this spectacular betrayal. And yet, hearing someone else articulate it stripped away the layers of denial I'd built up over time. What if I'm not strong enough? I murmured, voicing the question that had haunted me since boarding this train. Strength wasn't something I lacked entirely. I'd survived plenty of challenges before, but facing this particular storm alone felt insurmountable. The woman smiled faintly, her expression neither condescending nor pitying. Strength isn't about never breaking, she said gently. It's about piecing yourself back together when you do. And trust me, you'll break. We all do. But each crack lets in light, even if it hurts at first. Her analogy struck me deeply. Light entering through cracks, it sounded poetic, almost beautiful, yet the reality of it terrified me. Letting light in meant exposing vulnerabilities I'd worked so hard to bury. Could I handle that kind of exposure? Before I could dwell further on her words, the train jolted violently, throwing both of us backward slightly. A collective murmur rippled through the sleeping passengers as the conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, we'll be making an unscheduled stop ahead. Please remain seated until further instructions. The woman across from me raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Unforeseen circumstances, she repeated with a wry chuckle. Isn't that life in a nutshell? Despite myself, I found myself smiling faintly. You seem awfully calm about it. Oh, I've learned to embrace detours, she replied breezily. They always lead somewhere interesting, even if it's not where you intended to go. Her optimism intrigued me, though skepticism lingered. Detours implied flexibility, adaptability, qualities I wasn't sure I possessed anymore. Still, her perspective offered a glimmer of hope amid the chaos swirling inside me. Perhaps this unplanned stop wasn't just another obstacle but an opportunity to recalibrate, to reassess what truly mattered. When the train finally came to a complete halt, the lights flickered ominously before stabilizing. Outside, the landscape appeared desolate, marked only by sparse trees swaying in the night breeze. The conductor disembarked briefly, disappearing into the shadows while murmurs of frustration grew louder among the passengers. Some began gathering their belongings, preparing to abandon the journey altogether. Beside me, the woman stood gracefully, smoothing out non-existent wrinkles in her coat. Well, she said with a shrug, looks like my ride ends here. My heart sank unexpectedly. In the short time we'd spoken, she'd become a lifeline, tethering me to sanity in this surreal ordeal. Wait, I blurted impulsively, where are you going? She glanced at me, her gaze softening. Wherever the road takes me, she answered cryptically. Then, leaning closer, she added in a conspiratorial whisper, and remember, sometimes the best journeys aren't planned, they're discovered along the way. With that, she stepped off the train, vanishing into the darkness without looking back. I watched her silhouette fade into the night, feeling oddly bereft despite knowing nothing substantial about her. Who was she? Where was she headed? Did it even matter? Minutes stretched into eternity as the train remained motionless, trapped between destinations. Around me, tension mounted, punctuated by muttered complaints and restless shifting. Yet strangely, I felt calmer than I had in hours. The woman's words echoed in my mind, weaving themselves into the fabric of my thoughts. Maybe this detour wasn't a disruption but a chance to pause, to breathe, to consider possibilities I hadn't dared entertain before. Eventually, the conductor returned, announcing apologetically that repairs would take longer than expected. Passengers groaned collectively, many opting to leave the train and find alternative transportation. I hesitated, torn between staying put and venturing into the unknown alongside them. What would happen if I stepped off this train? Would I find clarity, or simply more confusion? In the end, I chose to stay. Not because I trusted the train to deliver me anywhere meaningful, but because sitting still gave me space to think, to process everything that had transpired. Each passing minute felt like peeling back another layer of myself, exposing truths I'd buried beneath fear and doubt. Hours later, when the train finally resumed its journey, dawn was breaking on the horizon. Golden rays pierced through the lingering darkness, casting long shadows across the landscape. As the world outside transformed from black to light, I allowed myself to imagine transformation within me, not immediate, not perfect, but possible nonetheless. Somewhere along the tracks, miles away from where I began, I decided to stop waiting for answers to arrive neatly packaged. Instead, I resolved to create my own path, however uncertain it might be. After all, storms eventually pass, leaving behind clearer skies, and sometimes the courage to begin anew. As the train picked up speed, sunlight streamed through the windows, painting fleeting patterns on the floor. The warmth of it touched my skin, a stark contrast to the coldness that had settled in my chest for so long. For the first time since boarding this journey, I felt something other than despair, a flicker of determination, fragile but undeniable. It wasn't clarity exactly, but rather an acceptance. Life rarely followed the plans we made, and maybe that was okay. The landscape outside shifted gradually, from barren fields to rolling hills dotted with wildflowers. Each mile seemed to carry me further away from the weight of what had happened, even if only symbolically. My thoughts drifted back to the woman who'd shared her wisdom before disappearing into the night. Her words lingered like echoes, guiding me towards some invisible truth I hadn't fully grasped yet. Sometimes the best journeys aren't planned, they're discovered along the way. Was this my discovery? A messy, unplanned detour forcing me to confront parts of myself I'd ignored? I pulled out the crumpled note he'd left in my sandwich, the one that read, "Enjoy the ride. You'll understand someday." Earlier, those words had felt mocking, cruel even. But now, they took on a different meaning. Maybe understanding didn't come all at once, maybe it unfolded slowly, piece by piece, as the miles stretched ahead. And perhaps someday wasn't about forgiving him or excusing his actions, it was about finding peace within myself, regardless of what he chose to do. When the conductor announced our final destination, I realized I didn't know where we were headed anymore. Somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere uncharted. That thought should have terrified me, but instead, it ignited a spark of curiosity. What waited beyond this train ride? Not answers, necessarily, but possibilities. Stepping off the train onto the platform, I was greeted by the crisp morning air and the distant hum of activity. The station was small and quaint, with faded paint peeling off its walls and flower boxes spilling over with vibrant blooms. It looked nothing like the bustling city hubs I was used to, and for once, that felt comforting. There were no crowds jostling for space, no hurried footsteps rushing past. Just stillness, broken only by birdsong and the occasional rustle of leaves. I wandered aimlessly, letting instinct guide me. A narrow cobblestone street led away from the station, lined with charming shops and cafes. Everything seemed to move slower here, as though time itself had relaxed its grip. At one corner, a bookstore caught my eye, its sign read "Stories begin here" in looping cursive. Something about it drew me in, and I pushed open the door, hearing the soft chime of a bell overhead. Inside, shelves brimmed with books of every genre imaginable, their spines worn from years of being loved. An elderly man sat behind the counter, reading glasses perched precariously on his nose. He glanced up briefly, offering a warm smile before returning to his book. As I browsed the aisles, my fingers brushed against titles both familiar and foreign. Then, tucked between two novels, I found a slim volume with no title on its spine. Curious, I pulled it free and flipped it open. On the first page, someone had handwritten a single sentence: "Beginnings are never perfect, but they hold infinite potential." The words resonated deeply, as if written just for me. Clutching the book to my chest, I approached the counter to pay. The old man raised an eyebrow when he saw it. "Ah," he said knowingly, "that one finds its way into people's hands when they need it most." His cryptic remark stayed with me as I stepped back outside. Infinite potential, that phrase echoed in my mind, mingling with the earlier advice about storms clearing paths and cracks letting in light. Together, they formed a strange sort of mantra, urging me forward despite the uncertainty looming ahead. Over the next few days, I explored the town, allowing myself to simply exist without expectation. I walked along winding trails, sketched scenes of quiet beauty in a notebook I'd purchased from a local artist, and struck up conversations with strangers who welcomed me with open hearts. Slowly, imperceptibly, pieces of myself began falling into place, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to feel whole again. One evening, sitting alone on a bench overlooking a serene lake, I finally let myself think about him. Not with anger or bitterness, but with a detached sort of clarity. His decision to prioritize his mother over me hadn't been mine to control, just as his inability to see us as partners hadn't been something I could fix. Love requires mutual effort, trust, and compromise, and while I had given all three, he had withheld them. That realization stung, yes, but it also freed me. For so long, I tied my happiness to his validation, believing that if I tried hard enough, I could make things work. But love shouldn't demand constant sacrifice. It shouldn't leave you questioning your worth or doubting your place in someone's life. If anything, this journey had taught me that I deserved more, not perfection, not grand gestures, but partnership rooted in respect and equality. A week later, I boarded another train, this time knowing exactly where I was headed. Home wasn't a physical place for me anymore, it was a state of mind, a sense of belonging to myself. When the train pulled into the familiar station, I stepped off with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. Friends greeted me with hugs, asking how the honeymoon had gone. Instead of deflecting or pretending everything was fine, I told them the truth, not just about what had happened, but about what I'd learned because of it. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, I rebuilt my life. I poured energy into passions I'd neglected, reconnected with people who mattered, and embraced opportunities I'd once hesitated to pursue. Through it all, I carried the lessons of that unexpected train ride: storms pass, cracks let in light, and beginnings hold infinite potential. As for him, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he remained devoted to his mother, their bond unshaken. Part of me hoped he found fulfillment in that choice, even if it came at the expense of something greater. We weren't meant to grow together, and perhaps that was for the best. Sometimes, endings pave the way for new beginnings.